I want to know, first of all, thank you so much for deciding to spend your evening with us and learn about South Africa and traveling to South Africa with us. But I'm curious to know where you're joining us from. So in the chat box, please put in where you are coming, which province. Hi, Barbara. Wow, Edmonton. Cool, Bahamas. Pennsylvania. Toronto, Nova Scotia. Wow, excellent. Cool. Wow, we've got another person from South Africa. That's great. Saskatchewan. Oh, another Toronto. Excellent, excellent. Okay, we've got people from all over the place. So we are going to get started. I'm just going to make sure that we've got, Philip, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so we're gonna get going. And I am sharing my screen. You all should be able to see my screen, correct? Can someone chat? Yeah?
Yes.
Oh, I see. Okay, excellent, excellent. All right. So I wanted to start with telling you a little bit about why I started doing this and a little bit background on what are the virtual travel tours are about. My name is Leila Levy, and I have a boutique travel concierge called Travel Design by Leila Levy, and my focus is building personalized and customized amazing vacation for my clients. And when I realized that now we can physically travel, and because I love travel, travel has been my passion all the time in my life, I realized that now that we can physically travel, perhaps we can travel in our heart and in our minds until the time that we can actually be able to travel again physically. So a little bit background about what I do. I help my clients with either building a fully customized package for them, or if they need a package tour or cruise or anything like that, I'll be able to do that and help them with what are the best options. And I provide an end-to-end itinerary as to kind of like daily plan. So it's very detailed itinerary planning for my clients. And today we're going to take you to South Africa, and I'm going to let Philip Solomon introduce himself. But one of the things that Philip and I work a lot is Philip, obviously he will tell you a little bit about his background, but for a lot of my clients, I'm using Philip's expertise when it comes to Africa and South Africa. He is a South African amazing person. And Philip, without any further ado, I'll let you to introduce yourself. But it would be amazing that someone actually local from South Africa can take us to South Africa. And although I do a lot of Africa trip for my clients, I still don't call myself an expert like you do. So take it away.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I really appreciate it. And of course, you didn't even have to tell people I was from South Africa just by my accent alone. I often joke and tell people that I come from Texas, but they never believe me. So I was actually born and raised in South Africa. I've been living in Canada for a long time. In the travel industry for well over 26 years, of which a large part of that was with Tour Can Vacations. And we work very closely with travel design in the customization of itineraries. So indeed, it is my pleasure to be able to talk to you about a country where I grew up and where I was born. I have also had the pleasure of traveling to so many other destinations in Africa, Asia, South Central America, and hopefully we can talk about those in the future. In terms of myself, I am someone who enjoys the outdoors, and therefore safari opportunities are always great. And in my spare time, I do a lot of running, and I also enjoy some cooking.
Philip, do you mind speaking up a little bit? Apparently, although I'm hearing okay and a lot of other people can hear okay, it would be great if you could speak up a little bit.
I am speaking quite loudly, still not good enough. How does that sound?
It sounds great to me, but I'm hearing from some of the comments in the chat box that it's difficult to hear. So, but the rest are saying that it's good. So I don't know. I'm
Okay.
just going to make sure that everyone else is on mute.
I'm going to try again, and I'm just going to do a little bit of a test here. My name is Philip Solomon. I live in Toronto and originally from South Africa.
Fantastic. All right. So in this slide, I wanted to take you on why South Africa should be on your bucket list. First of all, if you're an adventure traveler and you're looking for spicing up your life a little bit, South Africa would be a great place. It's a place that not only has great safari experience, you could go hiking, and it's a country that actually, one of the things that it's very special for me when I think about South Africa to some of my clients is because you see penguins there. There aren't that many countries in the world that you could travel and you could see penguins. And whenever that I'm talking about South Africa, I just put a penguin picture on there because that's sort of like how I love penguins in South Africa for that reason. They're amazing food and wine experiences, and we're going to take you to some of those places, but South Africa has lots of wine regions not so far from Cape Town, so it's really easy to go and have amazing food and culinary experiences there. Sometimes I know when people are traveling, they think about some of those challenges when it comes to the language that's spoken at that country, and obviously in South Africa, English is it's one of the main languages, so that wouldn't be an issue. From cultural and heritage side, it's a very, very rich country, and it has lots of stories that Philip will tell us more and more. And the other things that I really love South Africa is because of those beaches and the coastlines and how amazing those places are. And again, going back to some of those wildlife experiences that you see, one of the most magical things is the sardines run and the migration of that, and whale watching, which is really interesting in South Africa. I also wanted to briefly talk about the Blue Train experience, which is one of the luxury train rides in South Africa, and it will typically, they're mainly one or two itineraries, but it will take you from Cape Town closer to Johannesburg in that area. So that is one of the other amazing experiences. And great landscapes that Philip will tell us more and more. And lastly, but not least, it's where two oceans meet, which is another interesting point for me when you're visiting Cape Point. So without any other further ado, we're going to actually dive in and get into South Africa. So Philip.
Sure. I'm going to start off. One of the questions that I'm always asked is, how do we get to South Africa? And I see that we have people joining us from Canada, from the United States and other parts of the world as well. So there are a variety of options that you can take to get down to South Africa. Many people travel via Europe, whether it's London, Frankfurt, Zurich, or Amsterdam and Paris. We often make use of the Amsterdam or Paris combination merely because the connecting time down to South Africa is so easy. So you would fly, for example, from Toronto or New York or Miami to Amsterdam, you have a 3-hour layover. It's an overnight flight, 3-hour layover, 4-hour layover, and then a beautiful daylight flight into the city of Cape Town. Many of the airlines fly both into Cape Town and out of Johannesburg. And in doing that, it means you can use the same airline. South African Airways, just by the way, they fly out of Washington and New York. And from New York, it's a non-stop flight into Johannesburg. So you really have a very, very wide choice and variety. Some of the other questions I'm frequently asked, I'm just going to touch on these very briefly, is a question of safety. People often say to me, how safe is it to travel to South Africa? And I always refer to a report in The Economist magazine some while ago when they were talking about investment in South Africa, in which they referred to tourism. And they said South Africa is as safe as the safest destinations to which you would travel. You'd need to be as cautious there as you would be anywhere else. South Africa always ranks in the top 10 destinations to visit on a yearly basis. Approximately 60,000 plus Canadians travel to South Africa yearly. And most importantly, we wouldn't send you to a destination if it wasn't safe. In terms of malaria protection, because that's something else I'm asked pretty often, when you are going to be visiting game parks in South Africa, up in the northern part, northwestern part of the country, including and also the Victoria Falls, you will need anti-malaria protection. So you need to contact your health clinic or your doctor to get information about that. And as far as inoculations are concerned, you must check if anything is required at the time that you travel. The currency in South Africa is the South African rand. And what I can tell you is that it is currently very weak against both the US and the Canadian dollar. So your money goes a very long way once you are on the ground in South Africa. One of the other things people say, well, what is it that I pack? Well, South Africa is a casual society, but for traveling throughout South Africa, it's always lightweight, cotton, keep it light and easy, and really you will only need something warm for the cold winter months or when you go on your early and morning and evening game drives. But keep it light, and I always say to people, pack for 24 degrees and you should be safe on that. If we could move. So one of the other questions I ask, of course, is what are the travel documents that I need to get to South Africa? So no visa required for Canadians or if you're from the United States to travel to South Africa. However, if you are going to extend your journey to Victoria Falls, you do need a visa. Currently, it is US $75, and you get that on arrival at Victoria Falls. Just a word of advice, your passport must be valid for at least 6 months after your return, and it should contain 2 blank pages side by side. And now you're going to ask me the question, why is that? And really, I'm not so sure that I have an answer, but we believe it has to do with the fact that many people who travel to South Africa extend their journey to Victoria Falls, or they may go to Namibia, or they may go to Botswana, and they're moving back and forth between those countries in South Africa, and they probably want to keep that all together.
I just forgot to mention, sorry, one thing, Philip. If you have any other questions, we'll come back to all the questions at the end of the presentation. So we have about 10-15 minutes at the end.
Thank you. So this is a question I'm asked really very often. When's the best time to travel? Now, South Africa does promote itself as a year-round destination, but we find that most travelers travel between mid-September and mid-April, which is really spring, summer, and fall in South Africa. Now, temperatures will vary between the southern part of the country and the northern part of the country. So if you're traveling around October, you will find, for example, and I'm just giving you some examples now, Cape Town would probably be in the mid to high teens, Johannesburg in the early 20s, and when you go on safari around October time in the high 20s and maybe even touch on the 30s. But really that spring, summer and fall is a great time to travel. September, October is extremely popular because really that is the time just before the main rains start in the northern part of the country. So game viewing is really good at that time of the year because the bush is very thin and it's easier to spot animals.
So thank you so much, Philip. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those popular itineraries in South Africa. So this is one of the very popular ones that you fly to Cape Town. Sorry, let me go back. So you fly to Cape Town here. You stay about 4 days or so, and then you take the flight to Johannesburg, or if you're interested to hop on those luxury train that I mentioned, that would be another option to do so. And then through here, you go, here is where the safari experience is and the Kruger National Park is. There are about 2 days that you will need at least to have to experience those safari. And then going to the Victoria Falls and then coming back to Johannesburg and then potentially flying out of Johannesburg. So this is a very typical itinerary or plan that you will see, obviously. And one of the other questions that I get a lot is when people are interested to go to Africa, and if someone wants to really go and see for only safaris and animal watching, I probably would mention something like East Africa. But South Africa is one of those destinations that you will have great combination of experiences, from sightseeing, from safari, wine tasting, culinary, and all the other. So it's not entirely a safari experience per se.
Correct. Could I just add something there,
For sure.
Leila? I think what's important to note is that we're giving you an example itinerary in the time that's allotted, and there's plenty more to see if you want to extend your journey beyond 12 or 14 days. And perhaps that's something we could do at another time. But what you're going to be seeing this evening is really an example of one of the popular itineraries that is offered.
And probably the itinerary that the first time visitors to South Africa would follow.
Indeed.
So Cape Town, Philip, take us all there.
Well, what I'd like to do is perhaps take you on a little journey, as Leila has mentioned, starting off in Cape Town, making our way up to Johannesburg, doing some safari, visiting Mpumalanga, and this would be the first stop. Leila, just before I go any further, I am, if you don't mind, going to just shut down my video because I'm getting some reaction from that, and I hope that's okay if I just do the audio part.
Sure.
Okay. So Cape Town very often is the starting point of many of the tours that happen in South Africa. This really, as the slide says there, it's a coming together of cultures, cuisines, and landscapes. Cape Town has always been regarded as the mother city, and really the history dates back to the early 1600s when the Dutch arrived there in 1652 and met up with the local people. So a couple of things that we will offer as tours in the city of Cape Town would be a tour of the city itself and the beautiful Table Mountain. So what you really see in this visual is the Victoria and Alfred waterfront, the city itself in the center, and Table Bay looming in the background. You will see some clouds coming over the mountain, and the local people refer to the clouds as the tablecloth over Table Mountain. So a couple of things that we will do when we do our sightseeing. Part of a half-day city tour would be to take you up to the top of Table Mountain. They have a lovely revolving cable car. So the floor of the cable car actually rotates and you get beautiful, spectacular views of the city and the peninsula. Looking at this slide, if you look out into the ocean, you'll see an island located there, and that is Robben Island, where Nelson Mandela was incarcerated for 19 of his 27 years, but I'm going to touch on that in a little while. So the tour includes a trip to the top of Table Mountain. Usually your guide will accompany you, talk to you about the flora and the fauna. Most of the flora on the mountain is actually endemic to that region and to South Africa itself. As you can see, the views are spectacular. Spend some time up at the top of the mountain, and then we make our way back down and do further sightseeing. One of those places being the beautiful Victoria and Alfred waterfront. So the Victoria and Alfred waterfront, this used to be the old harbor in Cape Town, which was completely refurbished, redone, and is now home to hotels, a wide variety of restaurants, and various forms of entertainment. It's a very, very safe and easy area to visit, and is, as I say, is home, and you'll be able to try a variety of cuisines right in this area. Also part of the sightseeing is a drive and some visits into the city itself. And here you really are going to be learning about the origins of South Africa, the history of South Africa. Leela, if we can just go on to the next slide. Hello?
Oh, I thought I was on mute, sorry. Philip, can you hear me?
Yes,
Go ahead.
I can. Next slide, please. So what you're going to find visiting South Africa is that interesting combination of history. So the Dutch came into the Cape around the 1600s and the 1800s. The British were there. So traveling through the city, you will see very typical Cape Dutch style architecture, which you see in the top right-hand corner as you're looking at the slide. Down at the bottom, the beautiful city hall depicting Edwardian style architecture. And bottom left of your screen is a fort or castle, I guess, that was built by the Dutch in the late 1600s. So imagine all these interesting histories coming together, but not only from a historical point of view, but all those interesting cuisines that came from these different countries, including that of the Malay population.
So this is actually one of my favorite places, and I'm going to take you to Bo-Kaap, and this is what is known as Malay Quarter, and it originates back to 1760, when these people were brought from Malaysia, Indonesia, the rest of Africa, and even like some parts of India to work in the Cape. So these people were typically slaves, and they only need to make the color of the house only white. And when this rule was eventually lifted and they wanted to paint their houses all these bright colors as an expression of their freedom. And when you go to this neighborhood particularly, you see all of these like multicolored roads of house, and it has all this Dutch and Georgian architecture. It's kind of like, it's also known as the Muslim area, Muslim neighborhood. It has 9 mosques in the area. And one thing I typically recommend to my clients is going to a cooking tour or a cooking class in this neighborhood, because the way that they are cooking is very different. It's a mixture of all these cultures living together for so long.
Yeah.
And this is also one of my favorite things. So This is a non-for-profit set up by South African artists, and they actually help to promote and to stay connected with the culture of beadwork. And I have a sample of that. I don't know how to what extent you can actually see it, but this is something that you can buy, and a lot of people are actually doing these kind of things, and they buy it as souvenirs. And this is, for example, a bracelet of some sort, which is, it's like this. So this is a lot of beadwork, and they create all, you know, different shapes and forms and different artifacts, and you could buy. And this is one of the things that I would typically help to promote those local businesses, and especially because it's a non-for-profit, I always promote their business as well. Philip, do you want to tell us about Nelson Mandela more?
Sure, I do. So I mentioned earlier about Robben Island. I'm going to show you a couple of visuals of that in a minute. But what we often do is make itineraries unique and different to what you would probably experience out there. We like to include elements that are different. In this instance, we incorporate a talk by a gentleman by the name of Christo Brandt on the right-hand side of your screen, Nelson Mandela on the left. Now, Christo Brandt was the prison warden during the time that Nelson Mandela was on Robben Island. I think he was there for about 19 of his 27 years. And the interesting thing about this is the relationship that they established. Because when you think about prison life, you don't often think about a friendship happening between a prisoner and a warden. But they did establish this incredible friendship, which continued after Mr. Mandela was released from prison and after he became president of South Africa. And we invite Christo Brandt to come and do a presentation and a talk about his experiences with this incredible man, Nelson Mandela. So we do encourage visitors to South Africa to visit Robben Island. Robben Island is a short distance out in the ocean. There's a ferry that takes you across to the island itself. And until very recently, many of the tours on the island, they were actually, the guides were ex-political prisoners. Unfortunately, that's not happening that often anymore, as many of them have now reached the age where it's not possible for them to do that. But the experience itself is quite overwhelming, because when you do visit Robben Island, you will be shown the prison where the political prisoners, including Mandela, were incarcerated. If you can go on to the next slide. And actually see the prison 6 by 6 by 6 where he stayed and was in prison for that period of time, as well as the quarry that they were sent to work on a daily basis. The prisoners were sent out, they had to chop away at rocks with no specific reason for doing that. So I would really encourage a visit to Robben Island, and we like to include that in our itinerary as well. One of the other tours that we offer that's always included in our itinerary is a full-day tour of the Cape Peninsula. So Peninsula really is that area that's just out on the side of, and really what it is that Cape Town is surrounded or semi-surrounded, because it's peninsula, by the Indian Ocean on the one side and the Atlantic Ocean on the other. As Leela has indicated there, you can actually see the little peninsula. So we're going to do a full-day tour that takes us all the way around the peninsula. It's a beautiful drive along the way at various. One of those is Hout Bay. Hout Bay is a small fishing village. And Leila, you earlier mentioned about cuisine. Now, in this area, there's a certain type of fish that you can get, and it's called a snoek, S-N-O-E-K. So when you visit South Africa, look out for that, give it a try, and also they make delicious snoek. From House Bay, there's an option to take a boat ride out into the ocean to go and visit one of the largest seal islands in the area. Continue our journey along this incredible scenic route, traveling along an area called Chapman's Peak, as you can see, all along the Atlantic Ocean, and eventually arriving at Cape Point. Now, Cape Point, you won't be seeing it from this vantage point, unless, of course, you decide to do a helicopter tour. But this is where, by tradition, they say, the Indian Ocean to the left of your screen, and I beg your pardon, the Atlantic Ocean to the left of your screen, and the Indian Ocean on the right, supposedly meet. And that really is a fact. But if you went swimming in the Atlantic Ocean, you really wouldn't get into the water. It's freezing cold. If you go to the other side, the Indian Ocean side, you can easily swim in the ocean. That's how dramatic the currents are and how they impact the warmth of the water. So the touring here includes a visit to Cape Point. There's a funicular drive, a ride that you can take to the top to go and check out the lighthouse. Beautiful area to walk about, and of course, very scenic. Cape Point is often mistakenly believed to be the most southern point of Africa. It is not. That is much further to the east, to a place called Cape Agulhas, which I think is about maybe 200-300 kilometers away to the east. So Cape Point is not the most southern point, but it is significant for being the place where the two oceans meet. The full day tour continues a drive along this Indian Ocean seaboard. We go to a little place called Simonstown, which is the naval port of South Africa. We usually stop off there for a while, go to one of the local restaurants. We just give you this one as an example. The Seaforth restaurant, they do delicious seafood straight from the ocean and onto your plate. And then we go and visit one of these little unique areas that Lila's already referred to, and that is going to see the penguins. So I remember when I was living in Cape Town, Boulders Beach was an area where we used to hang out. It was a beach that we used to visit. Penguins arrived and they found safe haven, the wind. They found safe haven in terms of safety for the hatchling. And humans were then told, thank you very much, but you have to move away. This is no longer a beach for you. And the local government created a protected area for the African penguin. I seem to remember that at one point they were called the jackass penguins, and they now referred to as the African penguins. So walkways have been created where you can walk along and check out these incredible little birds, and your guide, of course, will give you a lot more history about these penguins. Beautiful thing that they have done in protecting them. If you look at this next visual, you can see the mountain range on the slide to the left. So that is Simonstown, and that is the area where you would go to visit the penguins. We will then take the drive all along the route, and it will bring us to a little town called Cork Bay and various other villages along the way. And this tour usually concludes at the beautiful Kirstenbosch Botanical Garden. So this is about 1,300 acres of botanical gardens. There are thousands and thousands of different species of plants. The majority of them are endemic to South Africa. One that you will probably hear a lot about is called the fynbos. Fynbos, if I really had to translate it literally, fynbos, and that is endemic to South Africa. So here you will have the opportunity to do a walkabout, learn about the flora and some fauna in the area. There's a beautiful walkway, canopy walkway that you can visit and take a walk in this area, and a wonderful way in which to conclude a full day tour of the peninsula.
All right, so let us recap so far. So one of the, I'm a very visual person. So what we did, we took you from Cape Town all the way through Cape Peninsula. So we did like a full round around the Cape Peninsula and came back to Cape Town. So I just wanted to make sure that you're following along. And if you remember, one of the things that I talked about, it was about the wine experiences and the fact that, I don't know if you're getting one of South African wines, but closer to Cape Town, there are areas that are very famous for those wine experiences. So in total, there are 5 main wine routes. And typically, if you're going on it 14 days or 2 weeks of South Africa and you're mixing safari, you probably can do only one of those wine experiences. But I summarized those 5 experiences for you so you have an understanding of what they are. So Constantia is closer to the city, and it's the country's oldest and most prestigious wine farms. The Helderberg is famous for white wine, and particularly Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc. Stellenbosch has about 150 states to choose from. Franschhoek is really pretty and it's home to the wine tram. So you may have seen, this is quite a touristy thing that a lot of people actually hop on the tram and they take them to different spots, to different wine states. So they wait, you go for a wine tasting, and even they give you enough time that you could grab your food and kind of like sit down, and then they bring you back. And so a lot of tourists would do that, but Philip will also talk about some of the less touristy wine experiences and wine regions. The last one that I wanted to point out is the Durbanville wine route, which is closer to the city, and it has a fantastic view of the Table Mountain and intense fruit-driven wines. So it depends on how long you wanted to spend to go for those wine experiences, whether you want a less kind of like an off the beaten path winery experiences, or you want more kind of like touristy tram experience. These are pretty much your options. And sometimes depending on, again, what my clients are asking, I recommend even like they stay over at the at a winery and kind of like have the full experience. But again, depends on what you're looking for. So moving along, Philip.
Yes. Um, so you've already mentioned the key wine, excuse me, wine regions. So if you look at the arrow pointing down to a place called Paarl, you look to the right of that, you'll see Franschhoek and Stellenbosch. So the wine, really the key wine region of South Africa is located an hour to an hour and a half drive away from Cape Town. So really very close to visit. So you can visit that, as Leila said, either as a day experience or actually go and spend a day or two if you're a wine fundi and you want to spend some time there. Moving on to the next slide, this is one of the areas, it's called Paarl, P-A-A-R-L. It comes from the word pearl because it's that rock formation that kind of looks like a pearl. But people do not only go here to do wine tasting, there are a variety of interesting wine estates to visit, but Paarl was also the place, the Victor Verster, where Nelson Mandela was freed and where he walked out of the prison to freedom. So there's a little bit of important history that's related here to the wine area itself. Moving on, again, this slide, if you look at the Cape Town, Paarl, Franschhoek, and Stellenbosch, those are really the 3 areas that you can visit either as a day trip or overnight. And it really is good to go and stay there for a night or two, particularly if you are a foodie, because in both Stellenbosch and Franschhoek, you are going to find some excellent restaurants. And if I'm not mistaken, Franschhoek has some of the top restaurants that you can find in South Africa itself. Really very good. The other thing that's particularly interesting about this region is the history, because we do know that this started as early as the time of the Dutch who were there in the 16 and 1700s. The French Huguenots who arrived here in the late 1700s and brought their knowledge of winemaking with them, established themselves in Franschhoek, French Corner, and there's a memorial actually there dedicated to them in the bottom right-hand side of the screen, as you can see, which is again historically significant. Typically, what you're seeing on the left-hand side is Cape Dutch architecture. So right throughout your visit in Paarl, Stellenbosch, Franschhoek, Robertson, you're going to see all this beautiful combination of architectures. Stellenbosch is really the hub of it all, the real main region area of the wine industry, and then of course the beautiful town of Stellenbosch. I would really, if you do have the time, I would really say spend a night or two in this region, because not only is it significant from its wine tasting, but historically significant as well. So after 4 or maybe 5 nights, depending on your itinerary in Cape Town, we take a flight up to Johannesburg. Flying time, about 1 hour, 50 minutes. So it's a quick flight up to Johannesburg South. So one of the places we're going to visit in Johannesburg is the township of Soweto. So during the apartheid years after 1948, and the populations were divided by color, many of the townships that were created for Black people were situated outside the major cities or towns. Soweto got its name because it is located southwest of Johannesburg. So southwest, Soweto, and that is how it got its name. And of course, now a huge, massive city on its own. And what you really see here on this particular slide are shanty towns, which you will still get to see when you visit there, but also at the bottom of this visual, the attempts that are being made by the government to try and improve the quality of life of the people from shanties into solid structures. The other interesting thing about Soweto, over and above the incredible historical role that it played in the changes that happened in '94, it is probably the only city in the world where you had 2 Nobel Peace Prize winners who lived within a couple of blocks within of each other. Nelson Mandela and of course Bishop Tutu. They were lived very, very close to each other, and most of the tours you will also be able to visit the home of Nelson Mandela. That's a vision of the Soweto, the Orlando Towers, which used to be part of a power station which no longer exists. What I do know that if you are interested in bungee jumping, I do believe they've introduced that. If you think you want to venture down one of those towers, you'll be a lot braver than me in doing that. In Soweto itself, of course, we're going to visit a number of places that are historically significant. One of those would be the Center of Freedom and Democracy. This is the Hector Peterson Memorial. Now, Hector Peterson was a young boy of about 12 years old in the 1970s when there was political action taking place. He was a young boy that was killed by the police, and this is a memorial dedicated to him and all those who fought for freedom and liberty in South Africa. One of the other places you'll get to visit is the Apartheid Museum, and it's really an excellent portrayal of the history of South Africa from 1948 right up until the present time, because we do know that it was after 1948 that all apartheid really came into existence, and everything that happened after that, and the significant role that was played by the people in Soweto in bringing about the changes that happened in 1994. when you actually arrive at the museum itself, you'll immediately get a sense of what to expect when you go into the museum. Historically, very significant and important to see. Okay, I'm just going to move on to the next slide.
I just wanted to bring up one point that a lot of people that they go to Johannesburg, they actually miss visiting Soweto. And to me, that's actually a biggest part of where the Black community were forced to live, and that's part of the culture. So if you're big on culture and heritage and understanding all of that, I see that as very important to visit that area as well, for sure.
Leila, I think you make a very good point, and you are right. A lot of people miss out there because there's this misconception, and people talk about, oh, don't go to Johannesburg, it's not safe.
Or there isn't much to do, because a lot of times you see that people talk about, well, you know what,
yeah,
Cape Town has tons of stuff to do, Johannesburg not so much.
correct. And so that's the other point. And also, when you're following the history of South Africa and you've been to Robben Island and you've heard the talk that was given, it's really good to go to Soweto because it's almost a continuation of that historical part with Nelson Mandela.
All right, so let me recap where we are now. So we've come along to Johannesburg, and now we're getting into the game reserves. And before going any further, and Philip, do you want to talk about Johannesburg Drive? And I wanted to launch a poll to the audience because I wanted to get some, I wanted to assess their knowledge about something about safaris.
Okay, sure. So when you travel from Johannesburg to the safari region, you can do it by flight or you can drive it. If you fly it, it's about an hour's flight, more or less. If you drive it, it's obviously 67 hours. What you see in the green on the right-hand side is what people are mostly familiar with is the Kruger National Park. And it extends all the way, as you can see, to the left of your screen. And within that region, you have a national park and you also have private game lodges. We're going to touch on that in a minute as we move on.
So before we get into the safari experience, so I'm launching a poll, which the question is, do you know what are the big fives?
I do.
Wow, interesting. The results are actually coming close. 40-40.
That's interesting.
Cool. All right. So good. So the majority of people, they don't know what the big fives are. So Philip, do you mind actually tell us what the big fives are?
Sure. So the big five are referred to five major groups of animals that are found: buffalo, Cape buffalo, rhino, elephant, lion, and leopard. So very often when people go on safari, they kind of want to see the big five. But what we say is there's plenty more to see than just the big five itself when you go on safari. So buffalo, rhino, elephant, lion, and leopard.
Excellent. So now, Philip, I want you to explain to us, well, what is the difference between the private game reserve and the national park?
Sure. Just by the way, I can still see the polling results up on the screen.
Oh, actually, the yes apparently won. So we've got 54% saying yes and 46% saying no. So kind of close, kind of 50-50.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a question I'm often asked. So the Kruger National, just before I go on to that, Leila, I just want to mention something else because we've spoken about having to take malaria protection, particularly to going to places like the Kruger National Park. And I just want to mention this as an aside. that if people are unable to take that kind of medication, there are game parks in South Africa which are malaria-free, so that we can organize that as well if you are not able to go to this particular region. So the question is private game lodge and national park. So the national park, really, the Kruger National Park, they have certain rules and regulations pertaining to a number of things. One, if you are staying outside the park, you have to be out of the park at a certain time. You may only enter the park at a certain time. Now, I want to make it very clear, game viewing in the Kruger National Park is terrific. And I'm by no means playing that down. When you do your game viewing in the national park, you do have to travel on the roads that have been laid out. So you're restricted as to where you go. You are not permitted to do off-road game viewing when you are in the national park. Now, what happened was people bought up land alongside the Kruger National Park many, many years ago and created private reserves or private game lodges. And for the most part, there are no fences that run between the private game lodge and the Kruger National Park. But because the land is private, they are allowed to traverse the land, and therefore they can track animals as they travel. Now, in the national park, you usually have closed or semi-closed vehicles. So that's an example of a semi-closed vehicle. Some are fully closed. But when you're at a private game lodge, the vehicles are open. And here you also get a game ranger and a tracker. And because you are able to traverse the land and track the animals, you get pretty close to them. So very often when I show this visual, people kind of say, wow, that's really getting close. And you do get close. One thing that I'll just point out is that the animals are used to the shape and the sound of a vehicle. And that shape and sound has never been a threat to them. And they don't really know what it is other than a shape and a sound, and it's not an enemy. So you get up pretty close. You can see the tracker at the back of the vehicle there, if we move on. And the other significant thing about the private game lodges is that you are able to do night game viewing. So you set out in the afternoon, your game drive continues into the evening, and then the tracker puts on the spotlight and you try to identify the nocturnal animals. Now, trackers play a significant role. These are guys that know the land, I shouldn't say guys, because ladies as well, who know the land extremely well, have studied animals, animal behavior, have studied the flora and the fauna. So they would look down at a footprint in the soil, as this gentleman is doing, and then you are able to track the footprints of the animal so that we can find it and show it to you. And it takes years and years and years of experience. So that's really a great thing to have when you're on a safari at a private game lodge, not only a tracker, but also the game ranger as well. And this is just an example of accommodations of the private game lodge. This is Shaduli Private Game Lodge that we use very often in one of the parks, and it kind of gives you a sense of the standards of accommodations. They're usually around, they don't really rate game lodges, but usually 4- or 5-star properties. It's a very good example. That, by the way, is called the Boma. So many of the game lodges have outside dining in a reed enclosure, and this is a typical example of that. The next slide really is a great one, because I really think it shows you that private game lodge experience. The open vehicle, the tracker in the front, and the close proximity of the animal. Here we have a giraffe looking at the people and say, what on earth are you all looking at? There's another good example, the tracker sitting right in front of the vehicle, and clearly in this visual, he's pointing out something high up in a tree, probably the birds, and they will be able to spot all types of bird species and rattle them off because of their years of experience. And of course, as we go out and do morning and afternoon game drives, we hope that you will get to see animals from the elephant, cheetah, some more elephants, rhino, and as you know, there's a lot of work being done to protect the rhinos. There's a lot of poaching happening in Africa, East and Southern Africa, when it comes to the rhino horn, and they're doing great work now to protect these incredible animals.
And these are, by the way, our pictures. So they're just pictures that are, well, I don't call, I guess, Philip and myself unprofessional, but this is kind of like the pictures that we took.
Yes. So, very sorry, very typically, what happens on a game viewing activity is that when you set out in the morning, there's usually a coffee break, and we stop along the way and having some coffee in the early hours of the morning. This is when you're probably going to need that warm jacket to wear. The drive then continues into the morning, and you return to your lodge for breakfast. And this usually happens for 2 days. There's a variety of antelope to be seen, a variety of bird species and other mammals throughout the journey. This is a beautiful shot of night game viewing. And then, of course, very important, when we do our night game drive just before the sun sets, we will stop somewhere safe and have a sundowner, make a toast, and set out again to do the night game viewing. So after a couple of nights on safari, and typically folks who do safari in South Africa do 2 or 3 nights. Again, depending on the time that you have, you can do more. And Leela mentioned something very important at the beginning of the presentation, is that very often people go to this region and then they leave, and there's so much more to see. So the top blue arrow is just an indication of where Shiduli is located. And the second arrow is an indication of the area of Mpumalanga that so many people miss when they do not go into this area. There's some beautiful sightseeing to see in this area, and of course, an array of accommodations where you can spend 1 or 2 nights when you do your sightseeing. I think we have an example here of some of the accommodation. So this is just one example again, and there are plenty more in the region. So what is there to see in this area of Mpumalanga? Let me give you a couple of examples. The beautiful Blyde River Canyon, now known as the Motlashi Canyon. An interesting fact about it, it is said to be the largest green canyon in the world, but also the 3rd largest canyon in the world. You can see it's incredibly scenic, very beautiful. We will do a scenic drive through this area and also to a place called God's Window, where on a clear day you can really see for miles and miles and miles ahead. This one was really taken in during the drier season and maybe not as green as the previous visual. This is also an area where you're going to find a lot of water. This is the beautiful Bergslac potholes. The Bergslac potholes are really rock formations that were formed by the flow of water over thousands and thousands of years. And there's walkways that go over this area. And it is also a region, there is an abundance of waterfalls. This is called the Lisbon Falls. So when you just think about it, you can really spend 2-3 days in this area doing all the sightseeing that so many people miss out on and don't get to see.
Absolutely. It's one of the things that not a lot of people do actually, because they don't know about it, or it's not typically written down on internet if you're searching on it there.
So what I mentioned earlier, we always try and incorporate elements that are not usually incorporated into itineraries. One of those is called Chimp Eden. So many of you may be familiar with Jane Goodall, who's done incredible work in Africa when it comes to primates, and particularly chimpanzees. In this instance, Chimp Eden was established really to rescue chimpanzees that have survived. They've survived, as the slide says, they're the bush meat market trade. They've either been orphaned or they were illegal pets. And they are brought to this safe haven, Eden, where they are rehabilitated. They help them to recover and get over the trauma that they experienced when they were in a circus or being used illegally as a pet. And they are able to live out their days in this semi-wild enclosure. It can be quite heart-wrenching when you visit Eden, but also so satisfying to see the excellent work that they are doing to protect the primates. So we spoke right at the beginning, we said many people like to extend their journey and go to Victoria Falls. And instead of going all the way back to Johannesburg, there is now a flight that operates very close to the safari region that can take you right to the area of Victoria Falls. So the area that we visited, if you look, you can see the Blyde River Canyon, the green area, and we just drive down to the airport at Nelspruit, and off we go, and we fly into Zambia, Livingstone, and you can either stay in that area or cross over, which we usually do, and go down into Zimbabwe. You want to just go on to the next slide. So just under a 2-hour flight that will take you into Victoria Falls itself. You don't have to go all the way back to Johannesburg. And I've already mentioned at the beginning that you need to get a visa. That visa is currently $75 US.
Oops.
A couple of other things to take note of with Zimbabwe. The US dollar used to be the currency. They have now changed that back to the Zimbabwean dollar, but foreigners may use the US dollar. I would recommend that when you are there, you only drink bottled water. In South Africa, the running water from the taps are fine. And usually we find that people who wish to extend their journey do so for a 2-night stay. So they go for 2 nights to Victoria Falls. We do incorporate a couple of sightseeing, such as tour of the falls and the Sundowner cruise, but there's a variety of other things to do as well. Some extend their journey even beyond that to 4 nights and include a couple of nights maybe in Botswana on safari. So here you have a beautiful visual of the Victoria Falls. So during your 2-night stay, you will be met, your guide will take you, and you'll actually do a walking tour down to the falls itself. Quite spectacular. And there's certain times of the year where they do run greater in terms of the flow of the water than other times. October, November, usually a little bit thinner than you would find in March, April, and May. So beautiful tour of the falls, and of course that lovely Sundowner cruise that we do on the Zambezi River. There's nothing like a African sunset, and traveling along the Zambezi River, which is also home to many hippos. So hopefully you'll get to see the hippos along the Zambezi River. There you go. There are a variety of other options also. What we include, if you want to do this, is what we call a Boma dinner. We've already mentioned that. And here you're going to be introduced to cuisines of Africa, not only Zimbabwe itself, but really a variety from southern and maybe other parts of Africa. And it comes with entertainment. So there'll be drumming and dancing from the local inhabitants. And it really is a fun outing and a great way to end a visit not only to Zimbabwe, but also to the area of Southern Africa.
So Philip, let's just briefly talk about the other
You
activities.
can do in Victoria. Yeah. If you're interested, there's helicopter flights over the falls. For those of you who want to do whitewater rafting, that's only permitted at certain times of the year. You can do a visit to one of the local villages. And there's this interesting train that you can see at the bottom right-hand side of the slide that makes its way to the middle of the bridge, which is really the border between Zambia and Zimbabwe, and they offer a dinner experience that you can do, and that's really also a lot of fun. So you could actually end up spending 2 or 3 nights in this region. So a lovely extension to South Africa.
And bungee jumping from the bridge too.
Yes, indeed. And again, you'll be braver than me if you did that, Leila.
All right, so that's pretty much the tour of the South Africa with the extension of Victoria Falls. But we also wanted to leave you with this quote that says, "We travel not to escape life, but for life not to escape us." And I'll be sending more information about 2 things. So I'm organizing a South Africa and Victoria Falls in October that I will be sharing more into your emails. And I'll be doing more of the virtual travel tour. So if there is a particular destination that you want to learn more, please let me know. I think this is the best time that we can keep educating ourselves and keep dreaming about all these beautiful places that if we haven't visited it, we wanted to visit now. The other thing is we'll be sharing a recipe, and Philip, I don't know if you wanted to give it away, but it will be one of the favorite famous South African dishes that we'll be sharing those. So you'll be cooking with us that dish, and we'll share the recipe with you. And I'm just going to open up for questions. If you have any questions, let us know in the chat box. Okay, so let me go through some of the questions here. So there was a question around those pictures for the game lodges and whether they were more on the private game lodges and not the national park accommodations.
Yes. So that example, excuse me, the example that I gave you was the private game lodge. So that's an interesting question because you can go into the national park, and the national park does have accommodations within the park itself. But that
there is another question around the best time to visit South Africa. I guess my simple answer is I would say South Africa is an all-time good place to visit. Obviously, there are better times than ever, but I'm just going to pull up that slide that we had, but typically spring or fall.
Yes, so that whole time, I think any time from mid-September onwards, right through to mid-April is good time. December, January, mid-December to mid-January is really peak high season in South Africa. Everybody's on vacation between the 15th of December and the 15th of January. But either side of that is really terrific. So the earlier part of September, October, November is really, we find from our experience, a very, very popular time to travel because the temperatures are very, very comfortable at that time. When you look at January, February, and March, you look into the hotter months when temperatures in the game park can reach 34, 35, 36 degrees.
And I guess I'll be scheduling another time about East Africa because East Africa is very different than South Africa. And that's why one of the points that I mentioned at the beginning was in South Africa, you can have it pretty much all. You could have a good safari experience as well as so many other things. If you are very particular about some of those safari experience and migrations that you wanted to see, probably East Africa would be the best time. And there are some specific timing that you wanted to follow for those. The other questions, Philip, are flights cheap within South Africa? And how about the blue train? I guess, do
Well,
you want to answer those?
well, the flights within South Africa are usually they're quoted. If you just want to purchase those, they probably would be quoted in South African rand. So if you have to convert that into Canadian or US dollars, then it does work out reasonably cheap. If you fly with an airline like South African Airways, then the domestic flights within South Africa is even cheaper because it is part of the same airline, but they're certainly not greatly expensive. In terms of the blue train, can I continue with that, Leda?
Sure, sure.
As far as the blue train is concerned, so this is 5-star luxury on wheels. It travels between Cape Town and Johannesburg, Pretoria. It used to be a one-nighter. I do believe it's now changed to a two-nighter. And it is, you've got to imagine the Four Seasons on wheels. That's really what it is. So
I think
it's about
£1,000 roughly ish.
Yes, I don't know offhand. I can't remember the pricing.
It's a very luxury experience that you wanted to have, and it's kind of like a Belmont train experience, or our kind of like the train experience that we have in Western Canada. So it's quite pricey, but depends on whether you're willing to pay for that experience.
Indeed. Can I add something to that, please?
Sure.
Lila? So there are two trains that operate. The one is the blue train. So I would say think of the Four Seasons on wheels. Then you have the Rovos Rail, and they are more traditional in style. So think of the Orient Express. Think of Fairmont style hotels on wheels. Both luxury experiences.
The other questions are, what are the best beaches to visit?
So in Cape Town, in terms of being able to swim, you need to stick to the Indian Ocean side. And I would suggest an area called Muizenberg. It's Muizen, Berg, B-E-R-G, I think it is, Muizenberg. And then if you're going to a province called KwaZulu-Natal, the temperature of the water in that area of Durban and the surrounding areas very, very warm.
That's closer to Kalk Bay, right?
Muizenberg is very close to Kalk Bay. So Kalk Bay, Muizenberg would be the warmer side to swim. Now there's a very popular beach in Cape Town called Clifton, and they're really 4 little beaches. But if you're not used to the temperature of the water, it really isn't all that pleasant to swim. The beach is lovely, the water is very cold.
Fantastic. All right. So there is another follow-up question. There seem to be 2 different the surfers. So which beaches did the surfers go?
Okay. So there are plenty of surfers to be found in Muizenberg. And there is a part of South Africa which we did not touch on, which is called the Garden Route, which we didn't touch on that area, which runs to the east between Cape Town and Port Elizabeth. So there are areas along that region, along the Garden Route, where surfers hang out quite a lot. And it slips my mind, but it is along that region. There are a number of towns along the Garden Route.
So just to expand on the Garden Route, basically it's across the coastline from Cape Town going east to Port Elizabeth,
Yes.
which is along the coastline. It's a beautiful drive. But the other, I think if people are looking for winery experiences, there is a different path that goes like through the land, and that is also a great wine tasting experience as well.
Correct.
All right. So, okay, back to that follow-up question. There seem to be two different shades of gray. I wasn't sure if that was geographic or ownership. Ilana, I don't know which one you're referencing. Do you want to unmute yourself?
I was talking about when you were looking at the national reserve versus the private reserves. When I was looking at the green, there looked like there was two different shades, but I wasn't sure if that was just a geographic difference or if that was the difference between the national and the private.
As in?
Oh.
Oh, are
This
you
one?
talking about the actual visual?
Yeah. Or if that was like the country differences or something.
So I guess that's a question, right? So there was two different shades of gray.
Yeah. So if you remember, I mentioned that the national park would be the lighter colored side. The darker colored side is where I mentioned where the private game lodges are all located.
Okay,
does that clear it? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Excellent. All right. So there don't seem to be any other further question. Philip, thank you so much for joining us and taking us to your beautiful land of South Africa. And I wanted to thank all of the participants that joined us today. And let me know if you have any feedback, suggestions, if you want us to host somewhere else in terms of other virtual travel series. My thinking and what the feedback that I've collected so far from what we run on our Instagram and our social media is people wanted to learn more about Japan, Iceland, Galapagos, and somewhat less known places, or less, I would say, touristy places. So if you have any suggestion or idea, let us know. And again, thank you so much. We'll share the recipe and more details about the tour.
And
thank you all.
Also just conclude, Leela, thank you so much for inviting me and for giving me this opportunity. It's been a pleasure to work with you, and thanks to everybody else.
Thank you so much, Philip. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your evening. Take care.
Bye-bye, everybody. Be safe.